The silver flecks of daybreak crept through the arched windows of the Ottoman palace, casting intricate shadows across the marble floors where Princess Nadia Fakhri stood motionless. Her dark eyes followed the patterns of light as they shifted with the morning breeze, a breeze that carried the scent of jasmine from the palace gardens below. In 3 weeks, she would be wed to a man she had never met, a diplomatic union with the son of the Russian ambassador, arranged to strengthen alliances in these precarious times of 1897. "Your Highness, you must practice," came the stern voice of Lady Yelena, her etiquette instructor. "The engagement ball approaches, and you still move like a child at play, not a princess." Nadia lowered her gaze. At 19, she had mastered 6 languages, could recite poetry that moved the court to tears, and had studied the political landscapes of empires. Yet in the imperial ballroom, she remained awkward, uncertain, a disappointment to her father, Sultan Mehmed, who demanded perfection from his only daughter. "I have arranged for additional instruction," Lady Yelena continued, her voice softening slightly. "Someone who understands our traditions but has a different approach. He will arrive tomorrow at dawn." That night, Nadia stood on her balcony overlooking the Bosphorus, where the waters glittered under moonlight like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Constantinople slept beneath her, a city of minarets and ancient wisdom. She touched the gold filigree bracelet at her wrist, her mother's last gift before illness claimed her 5 years past. "Is it weakness, mother," she whispered to the stars, "to fear a life without love?" The morning brought a slender young man to the palace's private instruction chamber. He bowed deeply before the princess, his movements fluid and precise. Nadia noticed immediately that he was not dressed as the usual court instructors but wore simpler attire of a palace servant, though impeccably presented. "Your Highness, I am Isaac Ardalan," he said, his voice carrying a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I have been asked to assist with your dance preparation." "You're not from the Royal Academy of Arts," Nadia observed, studying him with curiosity. A slight smile touched his lips. "No, Your Highness. I serve in the palace kitchens. But before that, I traveled with my father, who was a musician for many courts across Europe and the East." Lady Yelena, seated nearby with her embroidery, cleared her throat. "Isaac comes highly recommended by Madame Rousseau, who oversees the palace entertainments. He has an unconventional background, but exceptional skill." Nadia raised an eyebrow. A kitchen servant teaching a princess to dance seemed like a story from children's tales, not the rigid protocol of Ottoman court life. "Show me," she commanded, more harshly than she intended. Isaac nodded and approached a small hand drum placed near the window. His fingers began a gentle rhythm, building slowly. "Dance is not about memorizing steps, Your Highness," he said. "It's about feeling the rhythm in your blood, like the pulse of the Bosphorus against the shore, constant, flowing, alive." For weeks, they met in the early mornings when the palace still slumbered. Isaac taught not through rigid instruction but through stories that became movement. He spoke of rivers finding paths through mountains, of birds riding wind currents, of autumn leaves dancing to earth, and somehow, these images transferred into Nadia's body, transforming her movements from mechanical to meaningful. The waltz, he explained one morning, originated not in grand palaces but among peasants in the Austrian countryside. It was considered scandalous when first introduced to royal courts because partners held each other so closely. "How do you know such things?" Nadia asked, increasingly fascinated by this servant who spoke of world histories and philosophies as easily as he discussed spice blends and cooking techniques. Isaac's eyes, a deep amber that reminded her of honey in sunlight, met hers briefly before looking away. "My father believed education was not only for the wealthy. He taught me to read in 5 languages before I was 10. "And yet you work in the kitchens," she said softly. "Life rarely follows the paths we imagine, Your Highness." His voice carried no bitterness, only a quiet acceptance that moved her. During their 4th session, he dared to place his hand lightly on her shoulder to correct her posture. Both froze at the contact, forbidden, inappropriate. He withdrew immediately, apologizing profusely. "No," Nadia said, surprising herself. "I need to understand how partners move together. Show me properly." Hesitantly, he demonstrated the correct frame for the waltz, careful to maintain as much distance as propriety would allow while still teaching effectively. But as they moved together, something shifted in the air between them. The music seemed to enter their veins, creating a conversation without words. After that day, Nadia found herself watching for Isaac in the palace corridors. Once, she purposely walked near the kitchens, catching glimpses of him preparing delicate pastries with the same precision and grace he brought to dance. Lady Yelena noticed the princess's distraction. "You have improved remarkably," she said one afternoon as they selected fabrics for new gowns. "But remember your position. Some boundaries cannot be crossed." "I don't know what you mean," Nadia replied, her voice carefully controlled. "Yes, you do," the older woman said gently. "I've watched you grow from a child. I see the light in your eyes when he enters the room." That night, unable to sleep, Nadia slipped into the palace library. Among ancient manuscripts and diplomatic records, she sought distraction from thoughts of amber eyes and gentle hands. In a secluded corner, she discovered Isaac, absorbed in a volume of Persian poetry. He stood immediately, bowing. "Forgive me, Your Highness. I should not be here at this hour." "Do you have permission to use the royal library?" she asked, though without accusation. "The head librarian allows some of us access after our duties are completed." I can leave." "No," she said quickly. "Please, what are you reading?" He showed her the book of Rumi's poetry. "My mother was Persian," he explained. "These words connect me to her." For hours, they sat in the dim library, carefully maintaining proper distance, as Isaac read poetry aloud in Persian, then translated into Turkish. Nadia found herself sharing stories of her own mother, of palace secrets, of fears about her approaching marriage. "I have never spoken of these things," she confessed. "There is no one who would understand." "Perhaps that is the truest privilege of royalty," Isaac said. "Not jewels or power, but the freedom to speak your heart without fear of judgment." Their morning dance lessons took on new meaning. Through the structured movements of European court dances, they found a language that allowed them to touch, to connect in ways forbidden by their stations. Each placement of hand on waist, each turn where their eyes met, carried unspoken words. "Tomorrow you will dance with Prince Nikolai," Isaac reminded her as their final lesson concluded. "Remember what I taught you about leading without appearing to lead. Men prefer to believe they guide the dance." Nadia smiled at his small rebellion against convention. "Will you be there?" "At the engagement ball." "I will be serving wine, not dancing," he answered, his eyes dropping to the floor. "But I will watch you shine from afar." The night of the ball arrived with all the splendor the Ottoman court could muster. Diplomats and royalty from across Europe and Asia filled the grand ballroom. Nadia, dressed in silk the color of dawn embroidered with silver thread, her dark hair adorned with diamonds, moved through the crowd with newfound grace. Prince Nikolai Baranov, her intended, was handsome in a conventional way, with perfect manners and practiced charm. As they danced their first waltz together, Nadia applied all Isaac had taught her, guiding subtly while appearing to follow. "You dance beautifully," the prince commented, clearly pleased. "I had heard Ottoman princesses rarely participated in European dances." "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, her eyes briefly finding Isaac across the room, where he stood with other servers by the wall. As the evening progressed, Nadia performed her duties flawlessly, conversing with dignitaries, accepting congratulations, smiling at appropriate moments. Yet a hollow ache grew in her chest. This would be her life: perfect performances, diplomatic conversations, a marriage of convenience. Near midnight, she slipped away to the terrace for a moment of air. The night was warm, stars obscured by the glow of lanterns illuminating the palace gardens below. "You danced wonderfully," came Isaac's voice from the shadows. Nadia turned, surprised to find him there. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though joy leapt in her heart. "I know." He stepped forward, still maintaining proper distance. "I've been reassigned. I leave tomorrow for the summer palace to prepare it for your honeymoon visit." The words fell between them like stones. 2 weeks hence, after the wedding, she would travel with Prince Nikolai to the summer palace on the Mediterranean coast. I see, she managed, her voice steady despite the sudden pain gripping her chest. I brought you something. From his pocket, he produced a small package wrapped in simple cloth. A reminder that even within structured dances, one can find freedom. Nadia unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a small hand drum, similar to the one he used during their lessons, but small enough to fit in her palm, beautifully crafted with intricate inlaid patterns. Isaac, I cannot, please, he said. It was my father's. When you feel trapped by protocol, remember that rhythm lives within you, not in rules created by others. Impulsively, she stepped closer. Dance with me. One time. Here, where only the stars can judge us. He hesitated, years of understanding his place in the world warring with the longing in his heart. Then slowly, he bowed and extended his hand. Without music except the distant echoes from the ballroom, they danced a simple waltz on the moonlit terrace, their movements perfectly synchronized, as if they had been dancing together for lifetimes. When the dance ended, they stood facing each other, hands still joined. In another life, Nadia whispered. In another life, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. Isaac quickly stepped back into the shadows as Lady Yelena appeared at the terrace entrance. Your Highness, your absence has been noticed, she said, her eyes taking in the scene with understanding but not judgment. Prince Nikolai is looking for you. Nadia nodded, composing herself. As she turned to follow Lady Yelena, she slipped the small drum into the hidden pocket of her gown, feeling its weight against her hip like a secret heart. The next morning, Isaac departed for the summer palace as planned. Nadia threw herself into wedding preparations, playing her role perfectly while keeping her true feelings locked away. At night, alone in her chambers, she would sometimes take out the little drum and tap gentle rhythms that spoke of what could not be said. 3 days before the wedding, disaster struck. Prince Nikolai was found in a compromising position with the daughter of a French diplomat. The scandal erupted like wildfire through the court. Emergency meetings were held, diplomatic relations threatened to collapse, and by nightfall, the engagement was officially dissolved. Sultan Mehmed, furious at the public embarrassment, confined Nadia to her rooms while new diplomatic strategies were considered. For a week, she saw only her ladies-in-waiting and Lady Yelena, who brought news of the outside world and offered quiet comfort. They say the Russian delegation leaves tomorrow, Lady Yelena informed her. Your father is already in discussions with the British ambassador about potential matches with their nobility. Nadia nodded, resigned to the fact that one failed engagement only meant another would soon be arranged. And what of the summer palace preparations? All that work for nothing. Lady Yelena paused, studying the princess carefully. Your father has suggested you might benefit from some time away from court while this scandal fades from memory. The summer palace is prepared and staffed. If you wish to go there for a short retreat, I believe it could be arranged. Hope fluttered in Nadia's chest, though she kept her expression neutral. That seems wise. The sea air would be refreshing after being confined so long. 2 days later, accompanied by a small retinue including Lady Yelena, Nadia traveled to the summer palace on the Mediterranean coast. The palace sat on cliffs overlooking the sea, surrounded by cypress trees and gardens that cascaded down the hillside. It was smaller than the main palace in Constantinople, more intimate, with open courtyards and pavilions designed to catch sea breezes. Upon arrival, the palace steward greeted them formally, explaining the preparations made for what was to have been the honeymoon residence. Nadia listened politely, her eyes scanning the assembled staff for a familiar face, trying to ignore the disappointment when she did not find it. That evening, as she walked alone in the hillside garden, the scent of orange blossoms heavy in the air, she heard the faint sound of a drum. Following the rhythm that seemed to call to her specifically, she found herself in a small pavilion overlooking the darkening sea. Isaac sat on a stone bench, the last light of sunset gilding his profile as his fingers created complex patterns on a large hand drum. He looked up as she approached, his hand stilling. Your Highness, he said, rising and bowing deeply. I heard of your arrival. I'm sorry for your recent difficulties. Are you, she asked, remaining in the pavilion entrance? Sorry that I'm not married to Prince Nikolai. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I admit my sorrow on that particular point is limited. Nadia moved to sit on a bench opposite him, the proper distance maintained. I didn't see you when we arrived. I was overseeing preparations in the orchard gardens. We've created a small performance space there, with Lady Yelena's approval. Local musicians will play tomorrow evening. Lady Yelena approved this. Nadia asked, surprised. Isaac nodded. She suggested it might lift your spirits. She's been unexpectedly supportive of my ideas here. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell completely, the rhythm of waves against the cliffs below creating natural music. I practiced with your drum, Nadia finally said. Though I have little skill. Skill comes with time. Feeling the rhythm is what matters first. Over the next weeks, a delicate dance of another kind unfolded. By day, they maintained their respective roles, princess and servant, interacting only as propriety allowed, always with others present. But each evening, in the orchard garden or the sea pavilion, they would meet as equals, sharing stories, music, and increasingly, their hearts. Lady Yelena, in what seemed to Nadia a surprising shift in perspective, arranged for Isaac to provide dance instruction again, this time focusing on regional folk dances to expand the princess's cultural knowledge. These lessons, while chaperoned, allowed them to explore new ways of moving together, less formal than court dances but no less expressive. In Andalusia, Isaac explained during one such lesson, demonstrating hand positions for a Spanish folk dance, they believe dance tells stories that words cannot. The position of fingers, the tilt of the head, each movement has meaning. And what story does this tell? Nadia asked, mimicking his gesture of raised arms and arched back. This is yearning, he said softly. Reaching for something just beyond grasp. One warm night, as they sat in the sea pavilion watching distant fishing boats with their lanterns bobbing on the horizon, Isaac finally told her his full story. My father was a Jewish musician from Vienna who fell in love with a Persian court dancer while traveling with a diplomatic mission. Their marriage scandalized both families, and they lived as wanderers, performing in courts across Europe and the East. I was born in Cairo, grew up in Athens, Bucharest, and finally Constantinople. What happened to them? Nadia asked. Fever took my mother when I was 12. My father continued performing until his hands grew too twisted with age. He taught music to wealthy families in Constantinople to survive. When he died 3 years ago, I had no inheritance except his instruments and books. The palace kitchens offered work, and the head chef appreciated that I understood the cuisines of many nations. And dancing? Isaac smiled. My mother's gift. She taught me from childhood, believing dance was another language, one that crossed all borders. As summer ripened toward autumn, Nadia received increasingly frequent letters from her father, hinting at new marriage negotiations and the expectation of her return to court. Each letter weighed on her like stones, marking the inevitable end to this interlude of freedom. I cannot avoid my duty forever, she confessed to Isaac as they walked along a private stretch of beach one early morning, Lady Yelena watching from a discreet distance. My father writes of an English lord with connections to their royal family. I know, Isaac replied, his eyes on the horizon where the sun was just beginning to emerge from the sea. I have always known this time was borrowed. That night, unable to sleep, Nadia slipped from her chambers to the orchard garden where local musicians sometimes played. The garden was empty, bathed in moonlight that turned olive trees to silver sculptures. Taking the small drum from her pocket, she began tapping a simple rhythm Isaac had taught her, finding comfort in the steady beat. Your technique has improved, came his voice as he emerged from the shadows of the cypress trees. I had a good teacher, she replied, continuing the rhythm. He sat beside her on the stone bench, closer than propriety would allow but still not touching. From his pocket, he produced a folded paper. I received this today. An offer of position with the Austrian diplomatic corps as a cultural attaché. My father's former patron, who now serves as ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, remembered me and believes my knowledge of languages and customs would be valuable. Nadia's fingers stilled on the drum. You're leaving? I would be based in Constantinople initially, but with diplomatic status. A position of some respect. The implications hung in the air between them. Not a servant anymore, but still not noble. A man with prospects, with a future beyond palace kitchens and serving at royal functions. When would you go? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 2 weeks. Unless. He hesitated, then turned to face her fully. Unless I have reason to refuse. Nadia felt the moment expand around them, filled with possibility and fear in equal measure. What reason would be sufficient to refuse such an opportunity? Instead of answering with words, Isaac gently took the drum from her hands and placed it beside them. Then, with infinite care, he reached for her hands, holding them lightly between his own. I have nothing to offer a princess, he said. No lands, no titles, no political advantages. Only a heart that has found its rhythm in yours. Tears filled Nadia's eyes, but she did not withdraw her hands. My father would never approve. The court would be scandalized. I would be turning my back on centuries of tradition, on my duty to my family and country. I know, he said simply. I would never ask you to choose between your duty and me. That's why I'll go to Vienna, carry the memory of this summer with me always, and perhaps, from time to time, hear news of a princess who once danced with a servant beneath the stars. Nadia looked down at their joined hands, her skin pale in the moonlight against his sun-darkened fingers. In that moment, she saw with perfect clarity the 2 paths before her: duty, power, privilege, and loneliness, or uncertainty, possible hardship, but love and partnership with a man who saw her soul, not her title. What if, she said slowly, a princess decided that her duty to her own heart mattered as much as her duty to tradition? Hope flickered in Isaac's eyes, quickly tempered by reality. Your father would never permit it. Perhaps not immediately, she agreed. But my father respects strength and conviction. If you succeed in the diplomatic corps, if I stand firm in my choice, it may take time, but he might eventually accept what he cannot change. Are you saying? I'm saying I would rather face the challenge of forging a new path together than the certainty of a lifetime apart. For the first time, Isaac reached to touch her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. It would not be easy. Few things of value are, she replied, turning her face into his touch. The sound of approaching footsteps made them separate quickly. Lady Yelena appeared at the garden entrance, her face unreadable in the moonlight. I thought I might find you both here, she said, coming closer. You should be more careful. Others in the household are not as understanding as I have become. Lady Yelena, Nadia began, I must speak with you about your plans to defy convention and follow your heart, the older woman interrupted with unexpected gentleness. My dear child, do you think I haven't seen this coming since your first dance lesson in Constantinople? Isaac stood respectfully. You've known all along. I've lived in palaces for 50 years, Lady Yelena said. I recognize love when I see it, regardless of whether it appears in convenient packages. She turned to Nadia. Your mother, may she rest in peace, once told me her greatest wish was for you to find a partner who valued your mind and spirit, not just your title. I believe she would approve of your choice, though the path ahead will not be easy. Will you help us? Nadia asked, hardly daring to hope. Lady Yelena sighed deeply. Against my better judgment, yes. But we must proceed carefully. Your father may eventually be persuaded, but only if approached correctly, and only if Isaac proves himself worthy in the world beyond palace walls. In the weeks that followed, a careful plan took shape. Isaac would accept the diplomatic position, establishing himself in Constantinople and building his reputation. Nadia would return to court, neither accepting nor outright rejecting her father's marriage proposals, buying time with diplomatic skill of her own. Lady Yelena would serve as their intermediary, carrying letters between them and advocating subtly with the Sultan, emphasizing Isaac's rising position and valuable connections to European courts. Their final night at the Summer Palace, Lady Yelena arranged for them to have 1 hour alone in the Sea Pavilion, keeping watch from a discreet distance to ensure propriety was maintained in the eyes of others. Under a canopy of stars, with the rhythmic pulse of waves below, they danced one last time, not a formal court dance, nor a structured folk dance, but a dance of their own creation, movements that spoke of promises, of patience, of hope. "I will wait," Nadia whispered as they stood with their foreheads touching, hands clasped between them. "However long it takes. And I will become a man worthy of a princess," Isaac promised. "Not in title, perhaps, but in accomplishment and honor." 2 years passed. Isaac rose quickly through diplomatic ranks, his natural charm, intelligence, and multicultural understanding making him valuable in the increasingly complex political landscape of 1899. Nadia expertly navigated court politics, gaining her father's respect by participating in diplomatic functions while finding reasons to delay definitive marriage commitments. They exchanged letters through Lady Yelena's trusted hands, not passionate declarations that could compromise them if discovered, but thoughtful reflections on books, music, politics, and philosophy, revealing the deepening of their connection despite physical separation. Gradually, circumstances aligned in their favor. Isaac's diplomatic work brought him into the Sultan's presence several times, where his intelligence and insight made a favorable impression. Nadia's growing influence in cultural diplomacy gave her stronger standing with her father, who increasingly sought her counsel on matters of state. When the International Exposition came to Constantinople in 1899, bringing dignitaries from across the world, Isaac was assigned as cultural liaison to several European delegations. At the grand opening ceremony, protocol dictated that Princess Nadia, representing the Ottoman Cultural Committee, work directly with the diplomatic team, including Isaac. In the gilded reception hall of Topkapi Palace, before hundreds of witnesses including Sultan Mehmed himself, Isaac and Nadia were formally introduced as colleagues. When Isaac bowed over her hand with perfect protocol, those watching saw only appropriate diplomatic courtesy. But Lady Yelena, standing nearby, noticed how their eyes met in perfect understanding, a private dance within public ceremony. Later that evening, as musicians played and dignitaries mingled, Sultan Mehmed observed his daughter speaking animatedly with the young diplomat about artistic exchanges between cultures. Something in their interaction caught his attention, not impropriety, but a harmony, a mutual respect rarely seen in court conversations. "That young man," he commented to his vizier. "Ardalan. His background is unusual, is it not?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Common birth, but extraordinary gifts. The Austrians value him highly. There's talk of further advancement." The Sultan watched thoughtfully as Isaac respectfully excused himself from Nadia to attend to visiting dignitaries, his manners impeccable, his diplomatic skill evident. "Interesting," was all he said. 3 months later, after careful preparation and counsel from Lady Yelena, Nadia requested a private audience with her father. In the Sultan's study overlooking the Bosphorus, she spoke with the diplomatic skill she had honed over years at court, presenting not just her heart's desire but reasoned arguments for how a union with Isaac, now a respected diplomat, could create new kinds of alliances beneficial to the empire. Sultan Mehmed listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he rose and walked to the window, his back to her as he contemplated the waters that connected east and west. "You ask me to break with centuries of tradition," he finally said. "To allow my only daughter, an Ottoman princess, to marry a man of common birth, a Jew with no land or title. I ask you to recognize that the world is changing," Nadia replied steadily. "That new kinds of power are emerging beyond the old structures. Isaac bridges worlds that often remain separate, European and Ottoman, Christian and Muslim and Jewish. In these changing times, such bridges may prove more valuable than traditional alliances that divide as often as they unite." The Sultan turned, studying his daughter's face. "And if I refuse?" Nadia met his gaze directly. "Then I will accept your decision with the respect a daughter owes her father and her Sultan. But I will not marry another. I would rather serve the empire as your representative in cultural and charitable works than enter a political marriage without love or true partnership." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then, unexpectedly, a smile touched the Sultan's lips. "You have your mother's spirit and her wisdom. She too knew her own mind." He returned to his desk, seating himself with deliberation. I will meet with this diplomat of yours privately. I make no promises beyond that. 1 week later, Isaac was summoned to a private audience with Sultan Mehmed. For 3 hours, they spoke behind closed doors. When Isaac emerged, his face revealed nothing to the curious courtiers lingering nearby. That evening, at a small cultural reception featuring musicians from Persia, Nadia watched from across the room as her father approached Isaac. The Sultan spoke briefly, then placed his hand on the younger man's shoulder, a gesture of favor noticed by everyone present. Later, when protocol allowed them a brief conversation away from immediate earshot of others, Isaac whispered, "He has not refused. He sets conditions, a conversion to Islam for me, a 2-year diplomatic posting to Paris for both of us to allow court gossip to settle, and a commitment that any sons would be raised in Ottoman traditions." "And you agreed?" Nadia asked, her heart racing. "I said I would consider his terms respectfully and that I honored his concern for tradition and your position." A smile touched his lips. He seemed to appreciate my diplomatic response. "And do you?" "Accept his terms." Isaac's eyes held hers for a moment longer than strict propriety would allow. "I would accept far more difficult terms to dance with you for the rest of my life." 3 months later, after careful negotiations and preparations, a formal announcement was made. Princess Nadia Fakhri would marry Isaac Ardalan, now officially granted the Ottoman title of Bey in recognition of his diplomatic service. The wedding would be held after a year's engagement, during which the couple would undertake diplomatic missions to European courts to strengthen Ottoman cultural ties. The court buzzed with scandal and speculation, but Sultan Mehmed's firm support silenced the strongest opposition. Lady Yelena, now appointed chief coordinator of the princess's household, managed the practical arrangements with satisfied efficiency. On a perfect spring day in 1900, with almond blossoms scenting the air, Nadia and Isaac were married in a ceremony that blended Ottoman tradition with subtle elements honoring Isaac's heritage. As they completed their first dance as husband and wife before the assembled court, many observers noted the remarkable harmony of their movements, as if they had been dancing together all their lives. Later that night, in a private moment before joining the ongoing celebrations, they stood together on a palace terrace overlooking the Bosphorus. From her pocket, Nadia produced the small hand drum Isaac had given her years before. "I kept it with me always," she said, placing it in his hands. A reminder that even within the most structured dance, one can find freedom. Isaac smiled, his fingers finding a gentle rhythm on the drum, the same rhythm that had guided their first dance lesson, that had become the heartbeat of their story. "In all the courts of Europe and Asia," he said, "I never found anyone who understood the rhythm of my heart until you." Nadia rested her hand over his, stilling the drum. Perhaps that is what love truly is, two hearts finding their perfect rhythm together. In the distance, the music of their wedding celebration continued, but for this moment, they needed no music but the sound of their breathing, synchronized by years of waiting, by patience, by faith in the dance they had begun together.